Much has been said about Katharine Hepburn's scandalous private life, but there's one lover that sparked more controversy than all the rest. Allegedly, she entertained a romance with married director John Ford. On his deathbed, Hepburn went to visit him, and their conversation was recorded. Left alone, and assuming that the tape had stopped rolling, Hepburn and Ford continued to talk, and unwittingly revealed a heartbreaking glimpse into their darker history. Growing up in the early 20th century, Katharine was raised by incredibly progressive parents. Her mother was a member of the Connecticut Women's Suffrage Association and would take young Katharine to demonstrations. Her parents were considered scandalous by some, but that was only the tip of the iceberg. Growing up, Hepburn despised being a girl. She identified more with the boys and decided to chop off all of her hair, insisting that everyone call her Jimmy. Instead of persecuting her tomboy nature, her parents celebrated it, encouraging her to be her authentic self. Because of their unconditional support, she blossomed into a woman destined for greatness. Hepburn became a talented golfer, but even more importantly, she began digging into her love of movies. She had a healthy and charming childhood, but little did she know her life was about to take an unbelievably dark turn. When she was 13, Katharine and her older brother Tom went on a trip to New York during Easter break to stay with their aunt. The siblings seemed to be the very picture of happiness. But the morning after an outing to the theatre, Hepburn discovered something so disturbing it would haunt her for the rest of her life. She found her beloved 15-year-old brother dead, seemingly having taken his own life. Hepburn was inconsolable, but her family's reaction to the incident was chilling. Denial crept through Hepburn's grieving family like a disease. They refused to admit that Tom had taken his own life, and insisted that it must have been some kind of botched experiment. Katharine became a more anxious person, distrustful of other people, and as time wore on, the loss of her brother continued to burden her. No matter where she went, the memory of Tom followed. In college, she was awkward and self-conscious, refusing to join the other girls in the dining hall. But her struggle to fit in wouldn't last forever. After all, Hepburn was a born rebel. College opened up Hepburn's risk-taking sensibilities. In one of her more wild moments, Hepburn even stripped off her clothes and bathed in the cloister pond. She was even suspended for smoking in her dorm. In her second year, she joined the drama group and ended up playing the lead in one of the plays. It required her to dress up like a man, and that was a look that she often donned offstage as well. She sparked up a romance with Ludlow Ogden Smith, a socialite businessman and her future husband. But like many cases of young love, Hepburn and Smith came together at the wrong time, and in the end, fate dealt them a brutal hand. After getting a taste of theatre in college, Hepburn knew in her heart that this was her dream, but her father wasn't convinced. Being an actress often went hand in hand with poverty, and he couldn't envision her being a success. Forever strong-willed, Hepburn forged forward, hoping to prove him wrong. But it wasn't going to be easy. Believe it or not, Katharine Hepburn wasn't one of those actresses that made a sudden leap to fame. She started in theatre, and at first she stumbled in the most humiliating ways possible. There were criticisms about her piercing voice. Then after only a month into her theatre career as an understudy, she was suddenly called on to fill in for the lead role for opening night. She completely dropped the ball. She was late, messed up her lines, and even physically tripped over herself. After being fired, she consoled herself by getting married, but after only a few weeks of playing the wife, she was dying to run off and get back to her career. Through their 6 years of marriage, Hepburn exploited her husband's deep devotion for her. To his credit, Smith was a doting husband, supporting his wife both emotionally and financially, but his affections were never fully reciprocated. In the end, her heart was made for the theatre. Katharine was having a hard time holding down a job. No matter how hard she tried, theatre companies kept firing her. In 1931, she asked dramatist Philip Barry why he didn't want her in his play. His response was so painfully honest, it cut her to the core. But remember, Hepburn was never a fragile little flower. The rejection threw her for a loop, but she just kept trying. Good thing she did, because just as Hepburn began to flounder, she landed the role that would change her life forever. In 1932, she got her big break in The Warrior's Husband, a Broadway show that finally earned the positive reviews she'd been dreaming of. And like any proper Hollywood fairy tale, there was a scout in the audience who couldn't take his eyes off of the magnetic lead. In the blink of an eye, Hepburn was at RKO Studios for a screen test. Although landing a role in A Bill of Divorcement was a chance of a lifetime, Katharine Hepburn laid down the law. She wanted $1,500 a week, which for an unknown actress was unheard of. The studio took a massive risk in casting Hepburn, but they wouldn't regret it. Although the movie was Hepburn's very first screen acting gig, she seemed completely unfazed by the pressure. She didn't wilt, she blossomed, and when her debut performance hit the big screen, critics were awestruck. On the strength of the film, RKO signed her to a long-term contract, and just 2 years later she had won the first of 4 Oscars she would win in her career, although she never once attended an Oscars ceremony. But as Hepburn soon realised, the world of Hollywood was far more than just playing pretend. Behind closed doors, the personal lives of actors were filled with their own dramas, and before long, she too found herself swept up in a scandal. Her move to Hollywood brought her failing marriage to its inevitable end, not only because of her skyrocketing career, but because of the lurid affair she embarked on with married agent Leland Hayward. Surprisingly, Hepburn's divorce ended on a peaceful note, and she and her ex-husband remained friends for the rest of her life. While Hepburn fooled around with Hayward, she also busied herself with falling for another man, and she kept this infatuation as quiet as possible. According to controversial biographer Barbara Leeming, Hepburn also caught the attention of director John Ford, whom she worked with on the set of 1936's Mary of Scotland. Ford and Hepburn were like 2 peas in a pod. There was an ease to their growing friendship, and by the time Mary of Scotland had wrapped, the director was head over heels for his tomboyish lead. In fact, he was so enamoured with her that he planned on getting a divorce from his wife Mary so he could marry Hepburn. But that all came crashing down when his wife threatened to take his daughter away. According to Ford's niece, Hepburn even tried to sway Mary by offering her $150,000, hoping to free both Ford and his child in the process. But the actress sorely underestimated Mary. Ford was known as being a heavy drinker, sometimes going on benders for days at a time, but never whilst in the middle of making a movie. However, Hepburn would receive a panicked phone call from producer Cliff Reed, telling her that Ford had done something completely out of character. He'd gone on a wild drinking bender while in the midst of filming. The actress rushed to Ford's home, where she found him alone and completely inebriated. In an attempt to help him, she forced him to drink both whiskey and castor oil. And to her horror, instead of making him feel better, the cocktail made the director grievously ill. She felt sure that she'd nearly killed him, but even worse, she realised she couldn't save him from his own self-destructive behaviour. While the actress waited in vain for her tormented director, her other lover, Leland Hayward, grew more and more impatient. After both he and Hepburn secured divorces, it seemed like they were finally free to marry. But Hepburn dealt Hayward a heartbreaking blow. She turned down his proposal. But rejecting a powerful man like Hayward was a risky business. As she soon learned, the consequences were severe. Whether it was because she snubbed his proposal or because of her affair with Ford, Hayward ended up giving the actress the cold shoulder. He'd originally promised her a part in the play Stage Door, but after her betrayal, he ripped it out from under her feet. By 1936, Hepburn's acting career had taken a worrisome nosedive. She starred in 4 consecutive flops. To make matters worse, her prickly personality was turning the press against her. Hepburn could be abrasive and downright rude. As a very private person, she hated doing interviews and refused to give autographs. This wasn't winning her any popularity points, and soon she'd earned herself an unfortunate nickname, Catherine of Arrogance. Audiences were beginning to turn against her. She had catapulted to the top because of her unique qualities, but now, her questionable attire and manly attitude drew harsh criticisms. Aware of her falling star, Hepburn began to realise just how fickle Hollywood could be. When she learned about the epic feature Gone with the Wind, she decided to go for the part, hopeful that this would be her next big project. But producer David Selznick rejected her in the most insulting way possible. He told her that she wasn't sensual enough and that she lacked the character's sex appeal. For a short while, Hepburn decided to run away from Hollywood and its barbed insults, and it led her straight into the arms of her next romantic conquest. While on tour with a theatrical production of Jane Eyre in January 1937, she received a dinner invitation from notorious businessman Howard Hughes. They'd been introduced previously through their mutual friend Cary Grant, and since then Hughes couldn't get Hepburn out of his head. When she landed in Boston for a 2-week run of her play, Hughes took Hepburn on a number of dates, and the two of them made quite the pair, the millionaire aviator and the glamorous actress. Hughes certainly wasn't your typical Prince Charming, but something in Hepburn balanced him unlike any other. Secretly, however, Hepburn still pined for Ford, and hoped that he'd finally leave his wife. But that never happened. By May 1937, she'd tired of waiting around and made a startling decision. She moved in with her new boyfriend. For Hepburn, life with Hughes included yachts, airplanes, attention, and power. He had just set a new record for travelling around the world, and the couple were flying high. But in the end, no amount of money could buy them true love. After his record-breaking success, Hughes accompanied Hepburn on a trip to visit her family in Fenwick. Partway through their journey, he surprised Hepburn with the ultimate question. He wanted her to marry him. But Hepburn wasn't about to give up her independence so hastily. She still had one more test for Hughes, and if he wanted her to be his wife, he'd have to pass it. To Hepburn, her family was one of the most important things in her life. Before she could wed Hughes, she wanted to know that he loved what she loved, her family and her hometown. Upon arriving in Fenwick, it became clear that Hughes detested the entire visit. But that wasn't the worst part. Hepburn's family weren't happy with his behaviour. He wasn't interested in them whatsoever, and came across as arrogant and discourteous. And that was that, the nail in the coffin. Hughes ended up returning to the West Coast without Katharine. After starring in 1938's Bringing Up Baby, Hepburn ended up being called box office poison. It wasn't a good look for the struggling actress, and she found herself back on the stage, touring the Philadelphia story. The show was a huge success, and thanks to her generous ex-boyfriend, she had the film rights hidden in her back pocket. Thanks to her dazzling performances, Hollywood was eager to produce a film adaptation of the Philadelphia story. This time, Hepburn called all the shots. Firstly, she sold the rights to the best studio in the business, MGM, but she was only getting started. The feisty actress also had a strict set of conditions. She wanted her Hollywood throne back, and she was going to do anything to get it. When it came to casting, Hepburn knew she was going to be the star, but she picked two legendary actors to flank her, Cary Grant and Jimmy Stewart. The movie was tailor-made to restore her reputation. She needed audiences to fall in love with her all over again. It was a masterful plan, and only a sharp-minded actress like Hepburn could have pulled off one of the most impressive comebacks in Hollywood. When the film hit the screens, her hard work reaped gold. The Philadelphia story was a massive success. Her star was on the rise once again, but she wasn't done proving herself. Hepburn was a fearless woman in charge, and most fittingly, her next project was a rom-com titled Woman of the Year. Once again, she got the ball rolling, winning herself a fair share of power in the process. She got to pick her director, George Stevens, and her leading man, Spencer Tracy. Little did she know, meeting Tracy would turn her life upside down. Many believe that Spencer Tracy was the love of Katharine Hepburn's life, and Woman of the Year marked the beginning of their tumultuous romance. Hepburn fell for Tracy the instant she laid eyes on him, but at first, he wasn't as equally enamoured with his leading lady as she was with him. Hepburn and Tracy's on-screen tension captivated the imaginations of their audiences. Their popularity had studios casting them opposite one another time and time again, but in reality their connection was far more complicated than it seemed. Hepburn and Tracy's performances were so easy, so filled with meaningful eye contact, that audiences began to get suspicious. In order to keep their actors' morality clauses in check, the studios worked to bury their secret love affair. The resulting radio silence only bred rumours. Of course, almost everyone in Hollywood knew the scandalous truth. Tracy was a married man, and as such, his dalliance with Hepburn only fed his growing Catholic guilt. His religion took him to the darkest places. When his son was born deaf, Tracy blamed himself. He felt like it was God's punishment for his many sins. As time passed, Tracy's demons only stalked him harder, and as his lover, Hepburn was along for the ride. She accepted that Tracy was never going to give up his wife for her. His devotion to his religion wouldn't allow it. Tracy distanced himself from his wife and children, spending most of his time in rented spaces or motels. His love for Hepburn could never be publicly celebrated, and the pair were doomed to keep their affair a secret forever. Tracy battled anxiety, depression, and addiction. Hepburn herself called him tortured, and their relationship significantly affected her career. By the 1940s, Hepburn began devoting large chunks of her time to helping him with his insomnia and drinking problem. In many ways, she was a maternal figure in Tracy's life. But when confronted with the notion of actually becoming a mother, she freely admitted that she never wanted to have children. But if there was one contradiction to Hepburn's self-proclaimed selfishness, it was her undying devotion to Spencer Tracy. During the decades they spent together, Hepburn enjoyed a prosperous career. Unlike many of her contemporaries, she achieved the near impossible, staying relevant even as she aged. She was flexible and moved toward the parts that interested her the most. In the 1950s, she even took a risk by dipping her toes into Shakespeare. The 60s presented Hepburn with some harrowing challenges. For one, Spencer Tracy's health went into rapid decline. She stepped away from acting for 5 years just to care for him. In the end, they both returned to the screen for their 9th and final film together, 1967's Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. But it was a bittersweet experience. She would go on to win her second Oscar for her role in the film. But on June 10th, 1967, only 17 days after the film wrapped, Spencer Tracy died. His secret partner and devoted love, Katharine Hepburn, was at his side. Still respecting the sanctity of their secret, she didn't even attend his funeral. She waited until Louise Tracy's death in 1983 before she finally revealed the truth. But while this infamous Hollywood love story seemed like an open and shut case, some believed that there were secrets hidden behind the secrets. Throughout her entire life, Katharine Hepburn faced criticism about her boyish looks and fashion sense, not to mention her masculine attitude. She had no real interest in marriage or babies, and as a result, the media began to wonder whether Hepburn was a lesbian. But it didn't end there. Once linked to Spencer Tracy, the rumours expanded to include him as well. Just as there's controversy surrounding Hepburn's supposed relationship with John Ford, there's also a great debate about her relationship with Spencer Tracy. Some believe that their affair was a cover for their true desires, that Hepburn was a lesbian and Tracy was gay. The actor's struggle with depression is often cited as a consequence of his repressed feelings. Whatever the case may be, the speculation couldn't detract from Hepburn and Tracy's unique bond, an undeniable connection that survived the many barriers that stood between them. Although the loss of Tracy left a burning void in her personal life, Hepburn handled her grief in a singular way. Instead of shrinking away from the limelight, she raced toward it. For her performance as Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine in Lion in Winter, she won her 3rd Oscar, not that she cared. She held on to her fame with an iron grip, but as the actress aged, she changed in more ways than one. Hepburn had always been ambivalent about the press. As she grew older, however, she began to open up a little bit more. In 1973, she even graced Dick Cavett with a delightful 2-hour interview which allowed her fun-loving personality to shine through. One thing was for sure, Katharine Hepburn certainly knew her own mind. Her opinionated nature never waned, and she certainly didn't mind if her views ruffled some feathers. She proudly advocated for birth control and abortion rights. When asked about her politics, she didn't clam up or give a vague answer. And in a Hollywood where God always gets a shout out, Hepburn had no problem declaring herself a proud atheist. In 1973, Hepburn was reunited with one of her supposed flames, John Ford. Ford's grandson was writing a book about him, and arranged a meeting between the two. He recorded their conversation and got a lot more than he bargained for. When he left to grab something from his car, he left the tapes rolling. Unaware they were still being recorded, Ford told Hepburn that he loved her, and she reciprocated.
Take a snooze and I'll come by in the morning.
Okay.
Okay.
I love you.
It's mutual.
That private moment is at least some evidence that they had a deeper history than most believed. John Ford would die in August of that same year. As Hepburn grew older, her contemporaries, friends and lovers began to disappear, but still, she remained. Even into her 80s, Katharine Hepburn was a force to be reckoned with. Her athleticism didn't cease with her old age, and she continued to play tennis almost daily. She even discovered new hobbies like painting. But when it came to spilling old secrets, Hepburn wasn't done yet. After her brother's passing, her grieving process drove her to do something quite surprising. She changed her birth date to his, making her 2 years older. Hepburn, the Queen of Secrets, kept this one lie alive until she published her autobiography, wherein she confessed her real birthday. In the spring of 1993, Hepburn's health finally took a hit. Up until then, she'd continued to act, but after being hospitalised for exhaustion, her decline began in earnest. 3 years later, pneumonia came for her in a brutal way, and by 1997 the outlook was bleak. She held on for 6 more years, but it was an incredibly difficult time. The actress struggled with dementia, and in 2003 she passed from cardiac arrest. But there was one silver lining. 96-year-old Katharine Hepburn had closed her eyes in the place she loved the most, her family home in Fenwick, Connecticut. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more.